Welcome to the Farm to School podcast, where you will hear stories of how youth thrive and farmers prosper when we learn how to grow, cook, and eat delicious, nutritious local foods in schools across the country
and the world. We're your hosts. Hi, everybody. I'm Rick Sherman.
And I'm Michelle Markestein, and we are so excited to have Jared in the studio.
Hey, glad to be here.
Hey, Jared, I just learned that you were a DJ in college.
I was. Yeah, I had a great time. I had a variety show in the morning at 8 a.m. in Grinnell, Iowa, where I went to Grinnell College.
Oh, Grinnell.
And I got on with my roommate, James, and we would play old indie rock hits from like the late 90s, a lot of Pavement, Built to Spill, bands like that, Modest Mouse.
Oh, Modest Mouse. Portland.
And tried to tell bad jokes when no one was listening. So we had the studio to ourselves. Yeah, that was great fun.
It sounds like super fun. And I'm just wondering if you could more fully introduce yourself and your title and give us your farm to school greatest hits.
Yeah, of course. So I am Jared Hibbard-Swanson, and I work for the Oregon State University Extension Service.
Whoop, whoop.
Big title, Food Security and Safety Program Manager for Family and Community Health, which really means that I get to manage a few programs around food preservation, around food access, especially culturally relevant food access, trying to get folks the tools they need to enjoy important food, healthy food, nutritious food year-round. And that, like, greatest hits, yeah. So I never thought I would end up in this field. Never, ever. When I was a kid, I didn't garden, I didn't can, I didn't preserve. No one in my immediate family living in Dallas, Texas did either. It was kind of a suburban childhood. And, dirt was really a dirty word, truly a dirty word. Farming was a dirty word to me. I had all the negative stereotypes that people have around that. I deeply held on to those. And what changed? So this is one of my greatest hit stories about this, about my conversion to become a true, like, dyed-in-the-wool advocate for people growing their own food and preserving their own food. And I have to credit my wife. So I was in graduate school and living in Pennsylvania and had never grown a thing in my life. Maybe I'd planted a bean in like third grade science and watched it sprout, but I had no interest in it. And my wife, she'd done a little gardening. Her dad was into it. And she said, why don't we buy a jalapeno plant to grow on our balcony? And I thought that was a ridiculous idea because jalapenos are like, 5 cents for a handful at the grocery store. And you eat so few of them. Like, it's not even really a big source of calories. We don't eat a ton of spicy food in our diet. But she bought it, and then it ended up on her balcony in this little blue pot. And I was working on my dissertation in philosophy, so I spent a lot of time at the computer next to that balcony, and I could watch it every day. And I noticed that it wasn't really getting watered enough, and it was starting to suffer. So I took it on myself to start watering it, right? Because I didn't want to see this thing suffering, this thing on the deck that might die. Even if I thought it was a dumb idea to grow a jalapeno, there was a living thing out there that needed some TLC. So I started watering it, right? And, June goes by, and I'm realizing, well, I'm kind of the main one watering this jalapeno plant. And it kind of feels like my thing now. So I'm like a little begrudging still a little bit, but, I own it. I start watering it, caring for it. And then around late July, early August, we go on vacation. And I'm really worried about the plant. And we have a house sitter coming over. And I ask the house sitter, you got to make sure to water the plant. Oh, yeah, and feed the cats and scoop the litter and check the mail and all that. But you really got to water the jalapeno plant. And a week later, I come back and predict what happened. He didn't water the jalapeno plant, and it was drought stricken. The leaves were all withering, but somehow it had eked out these little tiny peppers, these little tiny, like 1 centimeter long or less jalapeno peppers. And we went out and we picked all of those peppers and we made a little salsa. And I have to say that was the greatest salsa I've ever had in my entire life because I grew those peppers. And so I was sold at that moment on, because I realized what was missing from that part of my life was taking care of something else in this sort of like daily ritualistic way where it was like, okay, I'm focused on my computer work, I'm focused on writing this dissertation, but actually the thing that's bringing me fulfillment and happiness is that there's this other thing out there that needs my care. And so gardening for me, that's how I got into it.
Wow, one plant did that.
Yeah.
Isn't that amazing? That I've never heard a story like that.
Well, and I got addicted. So how did I change from philosophy? I taught philosophy for a few years, taught environmental ethics. That's how I ended up moving out here. But I really loved gardening, and I started volunteering in a school garden, actually, Hammond Elementary in North Salem. A friend persuaded me to do it, And that became, again, like, it was gardening therapy for me. I got out a couple times a week, got to play with kids in the dirt. We would shovel compost. We would, go watch the bees and pick flowers and taste things. And I loved that. And I realized I loved that more than I loved sitting at my desk at Willamette University trying to come up with things to write journal articles on. And so I just made a big switch, right? I just changed. I did an AmeriCorps position with the Red Cross, doing school garden work, and then I got a job with the Marion Polk Food Share. We can talk more about that.
Yeah.
But my career was off right into farm to school and school gardening, and now food security work.
Okay, that's a good segue into that. That's where I first met you. You were working for Marion Polk Food Share. Could you describe what that operation was all about?
Yeah, so the Marion Polk Food Share is the regional food bank in the Mid-Willamette Valley, serving Marion and Polk counties, and Salem area, and Woodburn and Silverton. And they had a large community garden network at that time, and that's why I was volunteering within that network doing school garden stuff. And I had this idea. I remember I was, again, to tell a little bit of a story, I went on a backpacking trip with a friend up to Maxwell Butte near Mount Jefferson here in Oregon, and he was also a school garden volunteer. And we were having these, as you have sometimes on these like wilderness expeditions, you have these revelations about your life and what's meaningful. And he was asking me, I was in the midst of this transition, and he's like, well, what is it that you really want to do? And I thought, well, I have this idea that there are other youth who are living in the city who don't know that fulfilling experience of taking care of plants and of growing food and how like sustaining and fulfilling that can be. Mm-hmm. And I bet if we get together, we could get a group of kids and we could really grow some serious food, not just a little bit of these little thumbnail-sized jalapeno peppers. We could have a farm and we could actually produce a lot of food, and it would be meaningful for those kids, and we could give that food out for free in the community, and it would be meaningful for the people who get it. So this was just this idea, and there are other places I didn't come up with this. I wasn't the first person to have this idea. There's the Food Project in Boston had it, 30, 40 years before I did, and there are lots of programs around Oregon too. But I wasn't aware of those. And he was like, that's a cool idea. You should talk to Ian at the Food Share, Ian Dixon McDonald, who's still there at the Marion Polk Food Share. And he was a big supporter and believer in that idea and helped bring it to fruition, helped make it happen. That became my role at the Food Share. As I pitched this idea while I was doing school garden work of like, hey, let's do it with older kids, high school students. Let's do it as a summer program. They get a stipend. They get to learn how to grow food. They get to learn about agriculture, and they're doing community service, right? That food is going to go out into the community for free in different ways to folks who are experiencing food insecurity. So, we launched that at the Oregon School for the Deaf. They lent us, they leased to us 2 acres of land, something pretty small. And we did a CSA off of that and distributions into food pantries too for a couple of years. Then we partnered with Chemeketa Community College to start our 6-acre farm. It's still there. It's a much larger operation. They do about 120 CSA shares, so household box of produce every week for like a 14 to 16-week growing season. And so that program's still going strong. 20 to 30 youth teenagers every year are participating in it. So super fun program. Really, really proud to have helped start that and loved doing it. Was just a ton of fun. But at the end of 10 years, I realized like I had given to it what I could give to it, and it was time for some new energy and new enthusiasm, new ideas into it, and new opportunities were calling me. So I stepped away from that about 2 years ago.
Thank you for that journey through the Wayback Machine. That was really good. And so now you're at Oregon State University, and you have this big title. And one of the things you do is Master Food Preserver. You mentioned that. Yeah. I always look at it like a school garden is great once people, they grow crops and they want to kind of take the next step. Like we talked about raising chickens, like that could be a next step. Or what do we do with all this food if we have an overabundance of it and it might spoil? So I always think it's a really good idea to like, hey, talk about canning it and a safe way to do that. And I think that's where Master Food Preserver could come in. Now, for those of you in the other parts of the country, you've probably heard of Master Gardener, but Master Food Preserver doesn't get a lot of press probably, right?
Yeah, it's not as well known. It's not as well established. Not every state has a Master Food Preserver program. We're pretty fortunate in Oregon to have a flourishing Master Food Preserver program. Interest has, ebbed and flowed over the years in canning. I think currently we're in kind of a flow, right? It's increasing interest in it right now. But it is similar to Master Gardeners, right? It's a volunteer program where folks can take a certification course to become non-credit sort of experts in the field of food preservation, and they can give back volunteer hours to educate others in the community about it as extension volunteers. So, we have a couple hundred master food preservers, mainly on the west side of the state here in Oregon, that are out there doing workshops, answering our food preservation hotline. If you have a canning question or a freezing question or a pickling question, those are the folks to call. I don't have the number memorized. I should have written that down in my notes. I don't have that one.
Rick puts everything in our show notes.
Yes, we will.
Drop that in the show notes. Yeah, the food preservation hotline is live right now.
Okay.
So they're out there to educate people about safe ways to preserve food. Sort of dual goal: increase food security. Exactly the problem that you're speaking to. If people have an abundance of stuff out of their garden from their CSA share, maybe they went out with the gleaners and they got a bunch of loganberries or something, and they need to know what to do with them. Master food preservers can give them some ideas. And then secondly is the safety side of it, because this is big. The safety side of it's big.
I'm glad you said that, because things can go sideways. And with the Master Food Preserver program, they can teach you to do it at home safely. And I think a lot of people are like, oh, this science is too much for me. I could never do it. Just like they say, I could never be a master gardener. And I always feel it's not that hard, but it's a good environment to learn that stuff, to see if you're into it. What do you think about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, I'll go into story mode for a second.
Sure.
How I got into canning initially was we had some friends that asked us to house sit, and they had a big strawberry patch in the backyard, and they left in June, and they went on vacation. And we were the beneficiaries of this huge harvest of strawberries, and we ate as much as we could within a few days of picking them. But pretty quickly it became apparent that we weren't going to eat them all before they spoiled. And again, credit to my partner, Sky. She was like, I think you can can these in jam. And I was like, no, that's the thing that only really smart people can do, who have a lot of equipment. And she was like, pretty sure you can do that at home. And we Googled it and found extension resources. This was back at Penn State. We were living in Pennsylvania then. And they had great guides on how to make your own jam safely. Mm-hmm. And jam is like the entryway into canning, where it's low risk, it's very easy, it's super tasty, and in the summertime you get a lot of berries. That's the go-to product. So yeah, we made strawberry jam, and we canned it using some recipes from Penn State Extension. And it was delicious, and it made great gifts. And from there, I did more reading, because we had a garden at that point with tomatoes and peppers, and I was like, let's can some salsa. Then I read about botulism, and I was like, oh, let's read a little more before we can some salsa. Because when you get into low acid foods like vegetables, and tomatoes are kind of a borderline acidic food, you do have this risk of this fatal poisoning that can happen if the food is not canned properly. And it's rare, but fatal is fatal. It's the end of the road. You don't get a do-over on that one. So we were very careful, obviously, when we started canning. But I learned, I didn't have a teacher other than extension publications, extension bulletins, which were really well written, were a thorough guide to how to do it. And that's, again, those are the foundation of the Master Food Preserver program. It's the same research-based information that guarantees the safety of the product. Fortunately, preservation isn't just canning, right? There's traditional pickling, with salts to do lactofermentation. There's drying and dehydrating. There's smoking and curing. There's freezing. There's all sorts of techniques you can do. Each of them has their own food safety concerns. Canning gets the big headline because of the botulism concern.
Sure.
And I think it's right that we emphasize the fact that if you're going to go into the world of canning, you really do need to have some research-based recipes to rely on, and a little bit of reading up and training will go a long ways.
Yeah. I know a lot of people come to me in the school garden world, a lot of school garden coordinators, and say, we want to can food. And I'm like, great, this is a good resource. And I point them that direction. But a lot of them want to say, oh, we want to bring our stuff to a farmer's market and sell it. I'm like, well, that's a whole different ball of wax, because Anything
Yeah, it
that's
is.
fresh vegetables are one thing you could do. You could sell pretty easily, but anything with protein or canned or shellfish, or that's all a USDA thing.
And it's
You
not
have
just
to-
even sold, it's even donated, right?
Yeah.
So the Oregon Food Bank and its subsidiaries won't accept home canned
Yeah.
foods because there's no way for them to vet and that product to make sure it's going to be safe. So if you're canning stuff without a license, without being inspected by the Department of Agriculture, you're talking about doing it for yourself or as gifts for your friends and family who trust you, right? And so you might take a hard look at who's giving you the canned foods and ask them, where'd you get that recipe? Did you use an extension site? Did you use the Ball Cookbook, which they use research recipes, the USDA? There's lots of great sources. But you're right that selling it gets into a regulatory field that probably most people aren't prepared for because you have to have a license to do it.
Well, Jared, I trust you, and I consider you a friend. So you can give me stuff. in the
Stocking
show.
stuffers are on the way.
Yeah,
they're
thank
coming
you.
your way.
All right.
So thinking of like entry into food preservation, what's your sense of school gardens or doing food preservation?
Yeah, so like I was saying a second ago, there are lots of ways to get into food preservation, and we don't have to jump to pressure canning, which is the most technical and the most risky. And a lot of times folks go to that. But food preservation can start really simply with giving students in the school garden the tools they need to process something for freezing at home, for example, or doing a pickling experiment. So these are things that when I was working at the youth farm and we had teens with us all summer and we had access to a large kitchen right out of the farm field. It was kind of an ideal setup that not everybody has, but some of it's replicable. But we would experiment with some of those simpler processes. So we would teach the kids about how to make sauerkraut or how to make dill pickles straight from the fields, which doesn't take a lot of high-tech equipment. You can have a few jars or crocks or even just a pot and a dinner plate, and you can have a safe way to make sauerkraut or dill pickles. Again, looking online to find a good recipe that you trust is helpful, but that's such a safe product where you're using the natural bacteria that are floating around in our environment that are already on the surface of the vegetable. You're creating a little home for them with a lot of salt that's going to exclude some of the bad bacteria, and then the bacteria produce their own acid that keeps the food preserved and safe long term. So really, really easy to do, and it's a really fun science experiment. So we used to do that sometimes at the youth farm. And we did get into jam making, which again is not something that you would sell or donate, but the kids were able to, if they helped make it, they could take it home and try it in their household. So we would grow, we grew Yosta berries was one type of berry we grew, and we had access to like peaches and some other fruit and some blueberries. So we would do some jam with the Yosta berries primarily every year, which is a weird gooseberry currant cross. It's thornless.
We're so lucky in the Pacific Northwest. We're the berry capital of the world. Sorry, rest of the country.
Yeah.
But not sorry. I mean, we have so much of abundance of berries up here.
We do, right? So jam was an easy one for us. And so we taught the kids how to make jam and how to can that. Because again, it's a high acid food. Jam also has a ton of sugar in it, which acts as a preservative.
Yeah.
So we weren't concerned at all about the food safety of that product. It was a good chance to teach the kids, like, this is what boiling water canning looks like, and make it really accessible. So food preservation can start with simpler methods, and then as the kids have the knowledge and the skill and the maturity to engage in more advanced techniques, then you can explore those.
I will say I learned canning from my mom, and she grew up in the Depression, and she was so old school she would do jam, and she would just throw some wax on top of the thing and call it good, on the top of the jar. And it was always kind of funky when you'd open
recommended.
No, there was always be some mold on there. And like, she just scraped that off. Sorry, Mom.
Yeah, mold keeps it from rotting. That's what I heard.
But she was like, that's how my mom taught me. And, but whatever. Yeah, I'm glad we've come a long way.
Well, it's a great, if I comment on that real quick.
Please.
There's a, food preservation is a tradition, right? The different families have different methods they use. And when we're teaching food preservation, science-based food preservation, we have to be mindful of that. The people come to it with different backgrounds, and if you lead with this message that your grandma was trying to kill you all. Well, guess what? People aren't going to listen to you. They think they're insulting my grandma, and they're going to walk out. So it's good to listen to what people know about it already, what practices they've engaged in, and then present some of the new information that we have. Like, well, actually, we found out recently that mold that's growing on the jam actually can have some carcinogens in it and can really be toxic to you over long-term exposure. So we don't recommend that type of canning anymore because it can be harmful to your health. And that's new information that your grandma didn't have.
No.
Right? And same with...
Thank you. That puts my mind at ease. Thank you.
We always do the best we can with the information we have.
Exactly.
Right? I mean, give people the benefit of the doubt.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, well, just to that point, like you were talking about, and you just kind of touched on it, but more culturally relevant food preservation.
Right.
Can you kind of unpack that concept a little more?
Yeah. So, I'll start with myself. I mentioned earlier, I didn't grow up canning or gardening. My mom grew up on a farm in Kansas where they grew most of the food they ate, so she definitely canned. And that's the tradition of preservation that I, would have naturally been ushered into if my mom hadn't moved to the city and didn't have a garden. And I see that with a lot of students that I work with now who are from, quote unquote, the dominant culture, right? They're white, middle income. They talk about like, well, I have a family past of people canning and growing their own food. And that's why when they think food preservation, they jump immediately to canning. When I was at the youth farm, we had students from a much more diverse set of backgrounds, and canning wasn't a part of their culture, right? Folks who are families coming from Vietnam or Uganda or El Salvador, which are not places where home canning is done almost at all. But does that mean that people are only eating fresh food all the time? No, of course not. Every culture has found ways to take their harvest, to store it so they can enjoy certain important foods year round, like the berries into jam is the example you gave from the Northwest. So some of those practices could be salting and drying or fermenting, like kimchi is a great example, cultural example. Dried peppers is a common example when I would talk to some of our students from a Central American background, right? They say, oh, well, I guess my family does or did, and, when they lived in El Salvador or in Mexico, they did dry a lot of things.
Sun-dried,
Yeah, which is hard in the Northwest, right?
Yes.
Because we have such a humid, wet climate. Yeah. It's hard to execute a good sun-dry. But other folks from other parts of the world do it, routinely. That's their main method of food preservation. So being curious about the background of the students you're working with goes a long ways to ask them what they already know from their families. And we do that with adults as well when we teach food preservation. You start with asking, what do you already know? What's important to you? What do you eat at home? And then you can build a little community of people who are into good food.
Yeah, that's a good lesson to learn in that. Like I do sun-dried tomatoes, but I cheat and I do my food dehydrator and call it sun-dried, but it's really dehydrated tomatoes. Mm-hmm. But like you said, I don't feel right about leaving them out in the sun with the birds and stuff. Yeah, just I don't do that.
So, what do you think it will take to expand food preservation in the school garden world? And is it even? Maybe that's not even the right question. Maybe it's not even something we want to do.
Maybe a different way to frame that is, so the way you framed it there is like we have this cool thing, food preservation, and we're trying to be advocates to get more people to do it, which I don't think is the approach that I take to it, right? If people are interested in food preservation, I want to make sure they have the resources to do it safely, right? But maybe a different question is, what is it going to take to get food from the garden into households or to have that food available year round for students who want it? And that takes a set of techniques, right? So I remember when I was working in school gardens and elementary school gardens that some of the most memorable moments we had were when we harvested something and we prepared it, right? Where it wasn't just about gardening then, it was about eating. Because gardening's great, taking care of plants, as I said earlier, I love, and I think it's very fulfilling. But gardening for vegetables and for fruits means there are plants you get to take care of, and then you get to eat them, and that's super fun. So I remember we grew a sweet potato plant at the Hammond School Garden one year, which is challenging to do in the Northwest. But we had this huge sweet potato vine, and when the kids came back to school in September, we pulled it, and there were these giant sweet potatoes on the bottom of that thing. And we peeled it, and we diced it up, and we had a little butane burner and a wok, and we put olive oil and salt in, and we made little sweet potato fries kind of in the moment. And the kids loved it. It was like their favorite day in the garden. And so I think about how much more enjoyment and connection the kids can have to gardening if we give them tools to cook it and then also to preserve it and take it home.
Well, Jared, thank you so much for joining us. And I think you just made this podcast one of our greatest hits.
Love it. Thank you.
Thank you. Farm to School was written, directed, and produced by Rick Sherman and Michelle Markiston, with production support from Leanne Locker of Oregon State University. This podcast was made possible by a grant from the United States Department of Agriculture.
The content and ideas on the Farm to School podcast does not necessarily reflect the opinions of Oregon State University, Oregon Department of Education, and the United States Department of Agriculture. The USDA, Oregon Department of Education, and Oregon State University are equal opportunity providers and employers.
Do you want to learn more about Farm to School? Check out other episodes, show notes, and more by searching Farm to School Podcast OSU.
We would love to hear from you. Stop by that website Michelle just mentioned to say hello or give an idea for a future podcast.
Great. Thanks, Jared. We
See you
really
next time.
appreciate you
Thanks
making
for
the
having
time.
me. Yeah.
Bye, everyone.